Welcome back to So This is Thailand. Now, in case you're a little confused, we usually have expert advice in the studio, but today I got the opportunity to have a very interesting chat with a very nice man, a former US ambassador, Robert Fitz, who is now the director of the American Studies program at Chulalongkorn University, and he's going to offer us a take on the American elections, which is coming up very shortly. Follow me. So welcome to Expert Advice, and thank you for joining us. Robert Fitz, the Director of the American Studies program of Chulalongkorn University. I guess that everyone's keeping an eye on the American elections. It's going to make a huge impact on the rest of the world, and I'd like to get your take on this and what's going on.
Well, it's a very complex question with many different answers, but the answer, I think, from the center is that the election is very close. Now, this is not a strange event, because most American elections, America has had a constitution and been a country for 225 years, so there'd be 55 elections. Almost all of them are decided by 1 or 2 percentage points. So, but this election will probably be particularly close. We've been in the American Studies Center watching it quite closely, because many people are curious about it. Right now, the analysis is that President Obama will more than likely win re-election, but that's not at all guaranteed. The odds are right now about 3 to 1, which means if you had 3 elections, once Romney would win, 3 times Obama would win. But it probably, as I said, will be in 1 or 2 percentage points. Now, because some of the audience, is not American, I might explain why this is so. Even though the national polls are almost identical at 47% apiece, 48% apiece, the U.S. election is actually decided state by state. And each state's support goes to a candidate. All of the support goes to the candidate if the candidate only wins 51% of the state. Right. A number of states are completely going to go Democratic no matter what happens. California and New York, for example, no matter what kind of storm comes up or whatever, they will be voting Democratic. Texas will be voting Republican no matter what happens. So if you count up the votes that are almost guaranteed on either side, it still is fairly close. It's 201 electoral votes for President Obama to 191 for Romney, leaving 146 in the middle. You have to get to 270. But the trick is what is called swing states. These are states that in various elections might vote Republican, might vote Democrat. Right now, Obama is slightly ahead in most of the swing states. Romney's decisively ahead in North Carolina and slightly ahead in Florida. All the others, Obama's slightly ahead, which is why most people project that even though the national poll is fairly even, that Obama has a much greater chance of reaching the 270 electoral votes that he needs.
So whoever takes the swing states is going to take the election.
Right.
So America with President Obama and America with President Romney, is it going to look very different from each other?
America will not look very different. The two parties, because of this political system we have, it's not a parliamentary system. In order to really have power in the U.S., you have to control the presidency. That means if you're going to be a party, a party that lasts, you have to have a chance at getting almost 50% of the vote. And smaller parties, and there's 32 smaller parties, or 34 on various ballots in this presidential election, they're all tiny, they don't have a prayer of being president. So the Republican, the Democratic parties, the two largest parties, they have to craft their campaign to attract a majority of the vote, or they're not going to be a serious party. So both parties are somewhat at the center of American politics. Now, in a campaign, the party's specialty is to accentuate the differences, to make it seem like they're very, very apart. And indeed, in rhetoric, they do sound quite different. But in practice, you do find that the parties aren't all that different.
Right. What about, if they're so similar, then why should the rest of the world kind of sit up and pay attention about what's going on?
They are similar, but there are real differences. And those differences can reverberate around the world. One is position on the economy, which has a real impact on the world now that the Eurozone seems to be moving toward yet another crisis. That's not guaranteed, but it seems to be. The United States is having a faltering recovery, but it is recovering. Personally, I should tell you, I used to be an economist before I moved on to other things. Personally, I think the U.S. is set for not a really robust recovery, but for a very steady recovery, which will be very important in the world. But now if you look beyond the developing world, well, in Japan, of course, has been stuck in doldrums for 10 years or so. Everyone put a lot of faith in the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, China. All of those, India, excuse me, all of those are facing some real economic questions, including China, which no longer has just recently said they no longer will have double-digit growth. Exports from China are starting to look very shaky. So where is the world's growth going to come from? So the U.S. economy is extraordinarily important. And I should say to our visitors in Thailand, there is a feeling in Thailand that Thailand has somehow decoupled from Europe and the United States, that it's more dependent now on China. That's a fine feeling. It's not true. China's exports to Europe and the United States are very important to its imports from Thailand. And even though it says, you know, your export figures say all this stuff is going to China, actually a lot of things that Thailand exports to China are assembled into other products which are sent to Europe or the United States. So the United States and the economy remain very important. So the overall rhetoric of the Republicans is to stop the stimulus spending that has started actually under President Bush, a Republican, and carried through President Obama. To the extent they do that, it will impact the American recovery. Because the reason that Europe is slipping into crisis and the U.S. is probably coming out of crisis is that stimulus spending. If the U.S. should cut stimulus spending sharply, that would be a real concern for the world. Another item that those in ASEAN and in Thailand might be interested in, of course, is in foreign policy. And we saw in the recent debate that there weren't stark differences. Whereas earlier in the campaign, Romney had severely criticized President Obama. During the most recent debate, he was supportive of most of Obama's policies, although said he'd do them slightly differently. But there is a difference in approach between the two. We've definitely seen a difference between Obama and the previous president in his willingness to work multilaterally and his willingness to work with people that disagree with us on some issues. One of the hallmarks of this in the region has been the U.S. engagement with ASEAN as opposed to just working bilaterally with our friends and allies out here. That Romney, on the other hand, tends to be very skeptical of multilateral institutions and more insistent on American leadership. So you might find for better or for worse, a revision to a tone of American policy, more like that under George W. Bush than you would see under President Obama. Further, candidate Romney has been very, very critical of China during the campaign. A lot of that's campaign rhetoric. The China-U.S. relationship's enormously important to both countries. And neither country can just take one issue and force its will on that issue because there's too many other issues in play. But I suspect during the first months, anyway, of the Romney administration, if there was one, we would see a more testy relationship with China, which would spill over into the region because China itself is going through an election, if you will. New leadership is coming in. That new leadership cannot be seen to be less than protective of China's interests. So you might have a little bit of unsettlement in the region for a while.
Do you see any parallels starting to emerge? Thailand used to be a multi-party system. We're now moving towards more like two main parties. Are there any parallels between that and American politics?
There's slight parallels, but I don't want to give you a lot of political science jargon, but our presidential system and the electoral college we discussed earlier force the two parties to be majority parties. That, in other words, each party becomes a coalition before it goes to the polls. But in Thailand, you're a parliamentary system, and so you can afford to put together a coalition to have a government after the election. So you can have a number of smaller parties which still are players. Now, in the past decade, Thai politics has been the growth of one larger party. And I don't like to predict the future, but I would say the future probably is that party is going to slowly disintegrate into smaller parties. If you look at, I'm talking as a political scientist, and I'm not involved in Thai politics. If you look at the platforms of the two parties, I know that one side really likes their people and hates the other side, because this happens in politics. It's sort of like football. It's like Manchester United versus Liverpool. But the policies aren't that different. Both sides are going to find a way to support the rice farmer. Now, the rice mortgage scheme is different than other schemes. But they're not divided really by ideology. They're divided by personality and by regional leaders who have been subsumed now into Phua Thai as part of the Phua Thai bloc, but they actually have bases in individual provinces. And those may, as fractures start to appear in the Phua Thai party structure, they may reassert themselves to be somewhat more independent. That would be natural. If you had a presidential system, that wouldn't happen. But in a parliamentary system, you often have shifting of party coalitions, and one party will start breaking up and then another party will form. So looking just at the history of parliamentary politics, not just in Thailand, it's easier to predict that the Thai politics probably won't move into two major parties. Many parliamentary systems do move into two major parties, but then a third party starts, then gradually becomes the second party. So we'll see how it works in Thailand.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing some of your insights with us. And may the best man win.
Okay.
Welcome back to Phuket once again. Do you know Phuket has a lot more to offer than just the high-class hotels, the beaches, the clubs, the food, and the shopping. Yep, and the beautiful sun above as well. You can actually get a chance to experience the local community, the local lifestyle, just a short ways away from Phuket town, 5 kilometers, and you'll find yourself here along a seaside community, otherwise known as Ban Lam Tuk Kea. It's on Siri Island, which is, well, just a little off the island, but not so hard to find. Behind me is a traditional dance also known as Rongeng, and it's a dance that you'll only find in this particular area to these particular people as well. These artists are really quite adept at what they do, and the knowledge is passed on from generation to generation.
บ้านเมืองของเรารักเอาไว้กันเถิดนาปลาการังปูปลานี่แหละนะเต้าทะเลเปลือกหอยสวยงามที่น้ำนาเกาะสีเรยมองดูสวยเก๋นี่แหละทะเลอันดามันทะลักทักทำให้ครอบครัวอบอุ่นใจ เรามีความสุข
As a seaside community, much of the livelihood depends on that which comes from the ocean. And as you can see, local wisdom in making fish traps has not been lost on the generations. Simple wood, a little netting, and well, a little bait, and in the ocean it goes. Pick it up a few days later, and it should be teeming full of fish ready to eat. Oh, pearls. Well, we've seen a lot inside the community here about, well, daily living, tools of the trade, going out and fishing. Here we have an example of some OTOP products, but also related to the ocean. As you can see, they are beautiful examples of natural and cultured pearls, which, well, the ocean provides. It's a great and beautiful way to have an extra income for the villagers who not only have them sold here, but can also collect them from other islands throughout the area. Now you might be wondering, why are the prices so good? Well, you're buying them direct as per se. It's just like going to a gold mine and getting it from there. Well, here the pearls are just around the corner in the ocean, so no middleman, no extra cost. Well, we're just in time for the end of the day catch of shrimp, and it's called a praying mantis shrimp because it looks like a praying mantis, but it's in the shrimp family. Lots of things going on here, daily life, and well, just trying to get by. Hopefully you've enjoyed our trip throughout the community. It's a great thing to get out of the city, away from the beaches, and really get a taste of what it's like to actually be and living here in Phuket. We'll have to see you later though in the week and more in Phuket as well. Stay tuned.